Hi guys. So I'm going to break down the concept of a new poem, new Anglo-Saxon poem called The Wanderer. Okay, so what's important, I need you to, again, take notes, be aware of the commonality between The Wanderer and The Wife's Lament. Notice the strategies of the theme and how they correlate with one another. Let me open it up. Okay, so like The Wife's Lament, this is anonymous. It also appears in the book of Exeter. It is close in proximity with The Wife's Lament, so some people have assumed that this poem also could be labeled a riddle. I like to promote the fact that it's very apocalyptic, it's very dark, it's depressing. It shows an individual who's lost, lonely, and looking for connections. The issue at hand, however, is does he succeed in finding a connection? So I'll walk through the whole poem, and you'll see through your own interpretation, you can perceive the closure in your own way, in your own fashion. So the goal here, one of the main goals here this week, is for you to increase your sense of interpretation and your own personal analysis of this poem. Because of some slight vague details, like The Wife's Lament, you have the power of controlling the end result. So for the most part, there is no wrong or right answer to some of the situations I'm going to propose to you. Always keep that in mind. So long as you use a lens, you follow a strong, logical, analytical point of view, and you defend yourself with evidence, you'll be fine. Okay, now, if you look just at the title, it's called The Wanderer. Someone who wanders does not have a purpose, does not have a path, does not have a goal. They're just meandering from point to point to point to point. Another way of looking at it, they are in a limbo with, I might have just said this, without purpose. Okay? If you contrast the wanderer, the figure of the wanderer, with Beowulf, the epic hero, Beowulf has a purpose. That's the first thing of importance. He has a purpose, he has goals, he has motivations, he has faith in God. He knows God has a plan. So therefore, Beowulf has a firm connection to his personal weird. He has a sense of identity. The Wanderer, on the other hand, is the exact opposite of Beowulf. He has no purpose. He has no identity. He has no motivation. He has a very weak connection with God, and he feels he's been left abandoned. He's been abandoned by the world and by God. He is a Job-like character. If you've read the Old Testament and the book of Job, that's what I'm referring to. Okay, now, the other thing that's important to note, there are two narrations running through this poem. It can get confusing. Just be certain you look for the punctuation. Whenever you see the quotation marks, that is the character, the wanderer, talking. He's talking to himself. It is in first person. When you do not have quotation marks, like lines 7 and 8, these are spoken by a distant narration. narrator who is not a part of the action. I like to envision this narrative voice as the monk who is scribing down the poem. So in essence, he is adding in a Christian mentality to an older piece of work. There's no original version of this poem. This is the only version we have, so that's just assumptions on my part. Okay, now the first 6 lines are somewhat confusing. I admit that. But once you get over the hurdle of the first 6 lines, the rest fall into place. The other issue at hand is sometimes the wanderer, when he talks to himself, he'll talk to himself in third person. He'll refer to himself as he. Okay, so for instance, in the opening line, it says, often the lone dweller awaits his own favor. The lone dweller in this case is the wanderer. He's referring to himself with a kenning. With this being Anglo-Saxon, there'll be kennings throughout the whole poem. Another kenning for the wanderer, this time spoken by the monk narrator, is earth stepper. Again, like I said with other poems, when you see a kenning and it doesn't make sense, you got to sit back for a moment, contemplate what metaphor is being established. Okay. Moving forward, back to line 1. The narrator, the wanderer himself, as the narrator, is saying, often the lone dweller awaits his own favor. The measurer's mercy, though he must, mind carrying throughout the ocean's way, stir the rime-chilled sea with his hands for a long while, tread the tracks of exile, the way of the world is ever an open book. In line 2, the emphasis on the word measurer is putting a emphasis on God. So the measurer is God. God is merciful after all. The wanderer, the lone dweller, is in the mercer's mercy to an extent, and he is basically floating in a small boat all by himself. The line where stir the rime-chilled sea with his hands, I like to envision the wanderer sticking a hand or two into the water and just splashing it around. He has no purpose. He's been doing this for a long while. He is in exile. Your interpretation will come into act when you try to figure out if the wanderer put himself into exile, or if the motion of being a pariah was placed on him by someone else. The monk narrator in line 7 and 8, like I said, says, so spoke the earth stepper, mindful of miseries, slaughter of the wrathful crumbling of kinsmen. What these 2 lines establish, the wanderer has lost his entire community. In particular, they were slaughtered. He's lost all of his kinsmen. And this misery of knowing that they were slaughtered and that the wanderer himself wasn't there to help them is giving him a major case of post-traumatic stress disorder. One way of envisioning this, the wanderer was in his boat away from his village, and the village was under attack and wiped out. by an enemy force. The wanderer comes back and sees the destruction, sees the ruin. Nothing is left. Nobody survived. The entire people were wiped out. So he has no family, no friends. He has no king, no chief. He has nothing. And so he just drifts in his boat, totally numb. He doesn't know what to do. Without his community, without his chief, he doesn't have identity. So he's lost. He's lonely. The wanderer is going to speak now. Often alone, every daybreak, I must bewail my cares. There is now no one living to whom I dare articulate my mind's grasp. I know as truth that it is a noble custom for a man to enchain his spirits close, to hold his hoarded coffer, think what he will. Nor can the wary mind withstand these outcomes, nor can a troubled heart effect itself help. Therefore, those eager for glory will often secure a sorrowing mind in their breast coffer, just as I must fasten in fetters my heart's kin. Often wretched, deprived of my homeland, far from my free-born kindred, since years ago I gathered my gold friend in earthen gloom and went forth from there abjected, winter anxious over the binding of waves, hall wretched, seeking a dispenser of treasure where I, far or near, could find him who in the mead hall might know of my kind, or who wishes to comfort a friendless me, accustomed as he is to joys. I'll stop there at the moment. So you may pick up real easily the words like misery, grief, depression, friendless. He is lost in these moments of sorrow. The mention of gold friend right here in line 22, that is referring to his chief, the friend who gave out gold to his thanes. So no one is left. This event has happened in the past, years ago, and he's still lost and locked in the memory of it. It's totally destroyed his life, but he's still living. He's still ongoing. There are numerous mentions of financial concepts here, the coffer, for example, and gold. Gold will be mentioned a lot. They mean nothing to him at this rate. He needs community more than treasure, but he will still remember his gold friend and how the gold friend chief, gave him security, gave him purpose. Moving to the next statement. The experienced one, meaning himself, the experienced one knows how cruel sorrow is as companion. He who has few adored protectors, the paths of the exile claim him. Not wound gold at all, a frozen spirit lock, not all the fruits of the earth. He remembers hall retainers and treasure taking, how his gold friend accustomed him in his youth to feasting. Joy is all departed. Again, that's just confirming what we've previously just discussed. One aspect of the story that is blurred, that is vague, you don't know if the wanderer was totally oblivious to the incident where the enemy came in and wiped out the village, wiped out the people. There are more than one possibility here of the background story because we don't have the original version. With that in mind, the first plausible concept is, as I mentioned, he was in his boat away from the village at the time of the attack. That's one. The second major version is he actually was in the village at the time of the attack, but he performed poorly and could not help defend his people. Or worse, he ran away and hid like a coward. That alone would force him into self-exile. The third possibility is even worse than that, in which he orchestrated the attack himself by making a deal with the enemy. So the last two possibilities, where he was a coward and ran away, or he is the instrument that caused the destruction, that is why he cannot find another community to be a part of. People know his history, or they can figure out who he was and what he's done in the past. So for whatever unknowable reason, he can't connect back to a community. Or the other way of looking at it, he's so consumed by guilt that he cannot or will not seek out a community. So that's why he's seen as aimlessly wandering around. Throughout the piece, he'll be remembering and contrasting the past with the present. So even down here on the far left column, he is discussing with himself a Lord, and lays both hands and head on his knee. He's being the Lord is coming across as a fatherly figure, and that's all gone. Going back to the top of the far right column, he's still talking. Then the hurt of the heart will be heavier, painful after the beloved. Sorrow will be renewed whenever the memory of kin pervades his mind. He greets them joyfully, eagerly looking them up and down, the companions of men, they always swim away. This is memory swimming away from him. Also, notice he's referring to himself in third person. So where it says, whenever the memory of his kin pervades his mind, he greets them joyfully. That's referring to himself. The spirits of seabirds do not bring many familiar voices there. Cares will be renewed for him who must very frequently send his weary soul over the bending of the waves. Therefore, I cannot wonder across this world why my mind does not muster in the murk when I ponder pervading all the lives of men, how they suddenly abandoned their halls, the proud young things. This entire middle earth tumbles and falls every day. Specifically between line 60 and 65, that's where you get a sense that the wanderer himself has seen a major upheaval in his society. It's possibly not just his own community, but the entire geographical region in which he lives. It's as if a really major apocalyptic event has happened and wiped out everyone, and he's just happened to survive. He is like a last man on earth. So if that's the way you want to translate the story, that gives you a slightly different version of why he's so miserable, why he's lonely. Because in that sense, there never can be a solution to his problem. Whereas in the earlier versions that I discussed with you, those 3 or 4 concepts, he is in control of the situation and he can possibly break out of those patterns if he had someone to guide him and counsel him and help him. So again, this is all up to your interpretation, how you instinctively feel this story is going. So right here, he's he's discussing more of his issues. A stout-hearted warrior ought to wait when he makes a boast until he readily knows where the thoughts of his heart will veer. A wise man ought to perceive how ghostly it will be when all this world's wealth stands wasted. So now in various places throughout this middle earth, in the walls stand, blown by the wind, crushed by frost, the buildings snow swept. It's important to pick up on the imagery of ice and snow and frost. This is encouraging a heightened sense of loneliness. You can see him wandering in these terrains of thick ice and heavy snow, totally alone. The wine halls, notice it's plural, the wine halls molder, their wielder lies deprived of joys, his peerage all perished, proud by the wall. War destroyed some, ferried along the fourth way, some bird bore away over the high sea, another the gray wolf separated in death, another a tarry-cheeked warrior hid in an earthen cave. These are animal imagery that are tied to the Anglo-Saxon concept of important animals within their culture. These are the after effects of war. You will see the birds of Carrion landing. You'll see wolves coming in. You'll see other wild beasts coming in to devour the dead. All of these are examples. Going back up here, notice you've got various examples of different types of male imagery. The warrior, a wise man, okay. Excuse me. Here's another impact of apocalyptic concepts. And so the shaper of men, God, has laid this middle earth to waste until the ancient work of giants stood empty, devoid of their revelry of their citizens. The mention of giants gives the impression that this is an earlier pagan piece that's been slightly twisted into a Catholic or Christian poem. And that's the end of a major speech. Here you have the monk narrator stating, "Then he wisely contemplates this wall steed and deeply thinks through this darkened existence, aged in spirit, often remembering from afar many war slaughterings, and he speaks these words." So this little bit here is confirming that the wanderer is old and he's seen a lot of action. He's seen more than just his community wiped out, which again tends to impress upon an apocalyptic theme. Again, here he's going to be complaining about the loss of the court system, of the society, and the people that populated it. I'm skipping down. He's moving from his own gloom and applying it to the whole world. And he'll say here, and this whole foundation of the earth wastes away. So everything's in dilapidation, everything's in decay. Okay, that's the last time that the wanderer himself will speak. His tone of voice is very miserable, very much in despair. Notice what the monk scribe is now saying. So spoke the wise man in his mind, as he sat apart in secret consultation. The monk is now giving the wanderer a higher status. The monk has shifted the wanderer out of this guilt-ridden state into a state of being wise and experienced. Okay? This is a major twist in the whole understanding of the character. The monk is saying, a good man who keeps his troth ought never manifest his miseries too quickly from his breast unless he knows his balm beforehand, an earl practicing his courage. It will be well for him who seeks the favor, the comfort from our Father in heaven, where a fortress stands for us all. Here lies a problem. The monk is hinting that there is a hope for the wanderer. His suffrages on the mortal world will, according to the monk, shift the wanderer into heaven at his death, because he has a strong sense of faith and he understands his position with God. However, the problem is the wanderer never says this. The monk says this. So you're left with a contradiction, a discrepancy between what the monk wants you to, between the monk's main message and what the wanderer actually says. Okay? Depending on your own personal wavelength with this poem, one has to start here at the bottom and build a chain of defense all the way up to the top of the poem. If you want to believe the monk is accurate in his views of the wanderer, then that means the wanderer has faith. If he has faith, his guilt is self-inflicted, and it won't hold him back from heaven. He's suffering. Hopefully God has seen his suffrage and understands that his faith is strong, and therefore the wanderer did not cause directly the dramatic situation in his village. If you feel the monk is adding this second hand, separating it from the depression that's mentioned here, that the wanderer feels guilty because he's done something wrong, or he wasn't there to provide a strength and a protection of his people, then he fears he's going straight to hell. God has abandoned him, and he has no recourse. He has no action, just to be miserable for the rest of existence. Okay. Do go back and read it one more time Take note of the imagery of winter and cold and the manner in which the structure of the poem follows between a narrator and the wanderer. I do want to point out, I'll do it from the beginning. Notice you have open quotes, close quote. These two lines are the outside narrator, and then you have an open quote. Then you come down here, notice there's no closing quote, but there's a new open quote. What's happening, this is a continuation of the same speaker. That's why you have to be very careful with the punctuation. In a sense, this section here is like a second paragraph. And you might have noticed when you're reading prose how this occurs. If you need me to explain that in a different way, tell me. But whenever you see the opening when you see the opening quotation marks, it's a continuation of the wanderer speaking. So he's still speaking throughout all these lines. And sometimes he'll refer to himself in third person, like I've said. The other thing I'll point out, oftentimes the kenning of Middle Earth pops up. If you've read Tolkien, any of Tolkien, he talks about Middle Earth. Middle Earth is the mortal world, which is in between heaven and hell. That's it simply. So the Anglo-Saxons always referred to this mortal realm as the Middle Earth. Okay, so that's where we are. Tomorrow I will post an assignment that will be motioning and comparing between the Wanderer and the Wife's Lament. Having said that, I have extended the deadline for the last assignment. I did that today. So we'll see how we can juggle this around. If you've already completed the Wife's Lament discussion, please submit it ahead of time, and we'll go from there. If you need the extra time, use it. But starting tomorrow, we're going to be entering into a new unit shortly, and I need you to finalize an analytical essay about the Wanderer and the Wife's Lament. So take a deep breath. We're taking this slowly. Again, if you have any questions, by all means, drop me a line, and we'll see how we're going to be moving forward with this. Stay safe. I'll talk to you all soon.